And you have here, even on the call, my uncle Zazan Gizun and other Chassidim who actually had a personal relationship with the Rebbetzin. And therefore, it's all well known. And I shouldn't say all, because every day and every time I hear more stories. We all heard a story from my uncle last night, Zoltan Gizun, that I don't know if people had heard before. And I heard today a story from someone else. Um, but my point is that let's go back a little bit further to the average chassid, bocher, girl, family, child, adult, elder, and for more than 99% of the chassidim on Chof Beis Shevat 33 years ago, something happened, as the Rebbe called it in the Fabrengen, something happened. And so the Rebbe said it. And something that was actually not pleasant, and something that was actually sad. But nevertheless, a person can't just let it go. Everything has to impact our lives, and it's our task to make sure that it impacts our lives positively as an impetus of growth and strength in our own lives. So the average bocher, which I was at the time, we all didn't have, quote unquote, a relationship with the Rebbetzin. Of course, we did, in a way that we learned, most of us, later on, and as the years progressed, just like the Rebbe said about Rabbeim, about his Rebbe, and certainly, therefore, about himself, that as the years proceed, he is lebediker, starker, mer active, more alive, stronger, and more active. And certainly, it's this way with the Rebbetzin too. So on that day, I happened to have been at that time on Shlichus with a kvutza of other Bochrim and some other Bochrim in Yeshiva too in Boston, Massachusetts. And we found out that these pratim are not important. But we went, of course, right away to New York. And we actually came to New York in time. Uh, we went right away to the mikveh. That was the first stop we did. We ran to the Karastir mikveh. And then we went to the Rebbe's house. And someone said, for whatever reason, they let us in to the house. And we were left. There had been chakras there earlier on, and the Rebbe actually came down to the tefillas. I want to point out at this point, a lot of the stories that people hear are important for us as Hasidim to know. Every tenuah, every occurrence, every happening that Rebbe did is very, very important. There's a lot of lessons that can be learned, tili tilim, but nevertheless, the Rebbe asked us. The Rebbe asked us to um, to do something, and that's what I want to speak about a little bit, at least to try to explore, maybe all of us together. So, so we actually went to the Rebbe's house, and we said to him, that's what we did. And if you know the makeup of the house, which later on became the Beis Medrash, we were standing in the room, which is today the Beis Medrash, but the double doors there, and in the next room was where they had the Rebbetzin was there. The Tara hadn't begun. The Tara happened very close to the time of the Levaya, which was noon. And the Chevra Kadisha went in, they brought in stuff, and then the female Chevra Kadisha went in. First, the male Chevra Kadisha brought in the equipment and the different things. And there's a reason why I'm telling you all this. Of course, there's nothing to talk about gory details, but when a Yid, there's a procedure of what happens. And we actually said to Hillen, these Bachrim that were there from Boston, everyone else was really gone. There was a few other people there. For whatever reason, we were there, we came in, and that's it. We were there saying to them. And we went out where the Rebbe was already coming down the stairs to go to the Levi, and the Chevra Kadisha was in to take the Aron. So outside the Rebbe's house, of course, with thousands of Hasidim, and you all know there's pictures and video of the Levi. And then the Rebbe went into and to describe here and now in a short limited amount of time um, what this meant to the Rebbe. First of all, we couldn't even conceive, mechanistic begreifen. This is not something for us to even understand, other than what we would all know in regular human interaction when such a thing would occur. And then we're talking about the Rebbe, who was our Nasi, who was our everything, and and he meant everything to us. And suddenly, and I discussed it with other people too, like I said earlier, we didn't know that we had the quote unquote relationship with the Rebbetzin at that point. Some people at that point never even thought of the Rebbe as a person that is connected to a household. Beisai Zuishtoi. It's interesting that the Mishnah in Yoma tells us that the Kohen Gadol had to be, and we learned about it also in the Maimer Basilegani, and in that the importance of the connection to be grounded and to have a household. And indeed, the Torah doesn't allow a Kohen Gadol to be an unmarried Kohen Gadol. In other words, he had to have been a person with a wife. Rebbe actually discussed this in a certain union later on with the Zamaimer Hamusker. And I think the Rebbe was, I don't want to say bothered by this, but the Rebbe was looking into this. One of the things he discussed is he could still consider the son-in-law of the Rebbe, of his Rebbe, subsequently, al pi halacha, and that's a pilpul that we'll leave for another time. But I want to bring in that the Rebbe was looking at this idea. That being said, this is your every average chassid never looked at the Rebbe from that standpoint, from that viewpoint. We looked at the Rebbe as our Rebbe, as our mentor, teacher, guide, help, everything that you could think of what the Rebbe is. When we stood in the Rebbe's presence, we were in his battle automatically. We felt something that's not describable. That the mere fact that we were zoiche to be with the Rebbe in on every level. So here we have this occurrence that happened, and there's a lavaya, and then there's a kavura, and most people didn't go into the kavura. I, like most people, we stood at the fence and we looked, we saw, we were able to see certain things, but not from close. Some people saw from close. Most people stayed, like they asked, that you shouldn't go in. And you felt, and believe me, I was a person who went in pretty close to lifnai v'lifnim alat. But there's a certain times when one feels that would be inappropriate. And this was one of them. And nevertheless, we were able to see. We saw the Rebbe till the end. We saw even how the Rebbe throws the grass over his shoulders. Why are we talking about all this on a day like Chof Shevat? So then the Rebbe went back to his house, and we also all ran back to the house. And by the time it was all said and done, and I don't have the Yamanim in front of me, etc. But I want to say that La'erech 3:15 was Mincha. If it wasn't 3:15, somebody could correct me. But it was. We heard that it's going to be in the Rebbe's house, and the Rebbe's going to daven, the Rebbe's going to fear. Is going to be there, and we should add here that besides for those chassidim, the Yechidei Skula, who were less than 1% of chassidim, nobody had ever really been in the Rebbe's house. If you take all the stories of every delivery person who saw the Rebbetzin or the Rebbe's house this way, every person who worked there, and every person who had the privilege to visit as a visitor, and whoever it may be, it's all less than 1% of Chassidim. Just do the math. So, nevertheless, that 1% was charged with sharing with the other 99%, and that was part of the building of the relationship. But here, at this point on, suddenly, this was shared with everybody. Everybody, with the whole 99%, the whole 100% was shared with on the day of Chof Shevat Tavshin Ches. And to put it a little bit into perspective, things were going very good in Tavshin Ches. There was, if anyone were to describe When was the greatest hakafis ever? In other words, the greatest his galus of simcha of the Rebbe, the greatest revelation where you saw something. And I'm not an expert, and I don't know who it is, but people who live in brick homes, just from being there for several years, Simchas Torah, you'd know that Tavshim Ches is without question, Bekamus and Be'echos and things that we don't have to judge, was the most freilich ever, where the Rebbe danced himself each hakafa for 15 minutes without a guzma, jumping. I mean, it's not, and I'm not going to describe that here but if people know about it, and if you don't know about it, get to know about it. And then the Rebbe Fabring, that in just a week before Chof Shevat, the Rebbe spoke about Torah, and there was a Fabringen, and things were going. There was a Mishlachah sent to Russia. Different things were going on. It was Hakel. There was cards being made. There was a Bab. There was cards meaning people should join for the Hakel thing, and it was like an unbelievable just everything going on. And it was something that Chassidim were excited about. Then suddenly this earth-shattering event takes place, and now we're going to have a whole different direction is beginning. So that being the background, it's mincha. So what happens by mincha? People are coming to the house, and the Rebbe's house, just like anything else that the world was created with Agbolos and Zman and Mokim, time and space defined, but therefore being that it's finite, even though the Mokim Ha'oren Einim Min Hamida and we experience some of those miracles of the Oren not taking up any space, even though it was within a confined space, and people standing crowded and bowing down, even though they were person to person. We did experience a little bit miracles like that in 717 in the presence of the Rebbe. But be that as it may, there was a limited amount of people that would go in. And later on, they made Zdorim. But that day, they said Shluchim can come in for Mincha. Shluchim would have the schus to daven with the Rebbe the first tefillah after the Kvura. In other words, the Rebbe there was a minu for Shachris, like I mentioned earlier, and the Rebbe actually said the Kadeshim. But the Rebbe would now. I remember speaking, that as a bocher of almost 20 years old, we were just talking in that van ride from Boston to New York. I think now that I was going to daven for the Yom, and another bocher said, "What are you talking about? This is what was going on. I'm just trying to put it in perspective." Like the bocher who said that this was going to happen was of course right, but he's not a prophet. Nevertheless, it was just an understanding, I guess, of that bocher. And it's not questioned how the other person thought it was absurd, because we never looked at the Rebbe as what was going on. So now there's mincha now, and there was a thought that our chavedim maybe would go in because we were considered shluchim, we were talmidim shluchim in a yeshiva, but l'poel either they said or we didn't go in, but we did crowd next to the windows. And we figured out which window the Rebbe is next to, the second window there of the big room, on the side in the driveway. They opened the window stickle, and we davened from outside. This was before. Later on, they used to have a loudspeaker, a speaker system. You could hear if there was something. But here's what I want to get to. So the Rebbe davened, whatever we could hear, the little bit we heard. These are all recorded, by the way, and it could be heard now also. After Mincha, nobody knew what's going to happen. You could imagine maybe they will go out. They're Nechama Velim. What would be a procedure in such a thing? It hadn't even begun to sink in what was going on here. And you may ask, what are you talking about, Mendel Feller? Here the Rebbe spoke about Nasicha, Sharp Stephen Tovshim and Gimel, about selling the Beis Medrash, but because something happened and the women's mikveh wasn't fixed yet, and that the halacha is that a mikveh has to go before a shul and before school even, etc., etc. So we knew, yeah, this is all good and fine. Everybody knew that there's a Rebbetzin. People saw the Rebbetzin actually. In the 60s, the Rebbetzin used to pick up the Rebbe twice a week or three times a week from 770 and drive home, but it still wasn't part of the life. So here the Rebbe spoke and turned around, and no one knew what's going to happen. And the Rebbe turned around and he started to speak. It's printed, of course, on Muga. It's been edited by the Rebbe, and um, it's known as a Sikha. But really, um, we can't judge what our Sikha is and the class of a Sikha or the grade of a Sikha or the significance of a Sikha. That's beyond our pay grade. We are Chassidim, and whatever happens, whatever is done, that's what that's a Sikha. So it's a Sikha. But well, really, it was really an intimate talk, a short, intimate talk of the Rebbe to the Chassidim who were assembled. But um, really, it was a talk that the Rebbe shared with us something so profound at that moment. And really, it was the basis of what the Rebbe said maybe throughout the year and many years afterwards. And I don't even have it open in front of me because I don't. I'm actually not in my usual place. I'm somewhere on someone else's place, etc. And the Rebbe said that we turned around and people were just standing, didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what to do. So, like the Rebbe said, that there is a Chazal that says that you don't do the Nichem Avelim a little bit later on. But the Rebbe says, really, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Perek Dalet, I think it's Mishnah Yudches, that you don't comfort and console and bring solace to a mourner while the deceased is still hasn't yet been buried, hasn't been interred. So the Rebbe says that implies that if that has happened already, then Nichem Avelim could commence, meaning it could commence immediately. Now, the Rebbe went on to say, especially when it's talking about uh, such a mitzvah, which is connected with Avos Yisrael, and towards the end, it was very short, and it's you could hear it. You can go to the Asherenu, and you could hear it, and you could or Chabad.org, you could learn it inside. You could see the Mugadika piece. I mean, it's printed in Sefer Sichos, etc. And the Rebbe said that the well-known pasuk. Now, let me admit to you that maybe we knew the pasuk, maybe we had heard the pasuk, but it wasn't yet into our psyche. And at that moment, the Rebbe said that there's the pasuk. Shlomo Melech says, "V'hachai yitin el liboy." And by the way, if I remember correctly, the Rebbe used in that time, as the Rebbe sometimes will do, the Rebbe would change the way a pasuk is written for various reasons. And at that time, the Rebbe said, "V'acha yosim eliboy," and I will allow those who like to be more powerful in these inyonim to say what's the difference between sima, b'fiyim, or yitain, etc. Subsequently, of course, the Rebbe did say yitain eliboy, but the Rebbe said that really it's incumbent upon us to do the task of a hacha yitain eliboy, which basically means that those that are the surviving members, those that are alive, should place into their own hearts some lesson and something which would be inspirational about the person who has passed on. And it's a very powerful pasuk because Yosim Aliboy Yitin Aliboy means that you have to take it to heart. If I may just repeat a well-known story, but there's a piece of it that's Negeya here, that and I'm not going to go to the Arichas Advarim because of the limited time and space, like we said earlier. The Rebbe once asked me in front of a bunch of women in Machon if I know the four questions. He asked me in English, "Do you know the four questions?" And then the Rebbe said, "By heart." And then he pointed to my father. Does he know the answer? It's a well-known story. It happened Pesach Tov Shalamed Zayin. But then the next day, the Rebbe called my father into Yechidus, Zangezun, and the Rebbe. One of the things the Rebbe said there is that I used explicitly the expression of by heart in English and not the Yiddish Oisenbenik and not the Hebrew Baal Peh, because by heart, to describe something which you don't have to look inside to refer to it, but you know it with your memory. That ever said he used by heart because that means with your heart. That means it's part of you. That means it's really something that you care about, and it's really something that can move you to do what you're supposed to do. So here, let's go back to the Chof Shevat Tashman text. The Rebbe said that therefore this is the time of Hachai Yitin Aliboy. All of us, the Chassidim are the Chai over here, the Yitin Aliboy, to place into our heart something that we learn from the existence of the Rebbe. And so that moment, the Rebbe really not only introduced and shared with the other 99% that there's something that's important here. It's not just for the Rebbe, and it's not the loss wasn't for the Rebbe, and then her life wasn't just for the Rebbe. But this was the foundation of not only the next week of what the Rebbe would say and the next years, but also something which lives with us today. And then the pinnacle of this sikha was, and it was actually the final words of the sikha. The Rebbe said, and the Rebbe really was choked up with tears and emotion. And after the Rebbe spoke about the importance of the Vachayit Naliboy that we should take to heart, he said, since the pasuk begins with that part of the pasuk says V'hachai, he said especially, particularly when we are talking about a woman who was called Chaya, and that's why he finished the sikha. That was the last word of the sikha. So the Rebbe made it very personal, and he made it very pertinent, and he connected it directly with not only personally to himself, but personally to the Rebbetzin. And if you think about that just for a moment, really the pasuk of V'achayit Neliboy, quite simply, is for every single occurrence, Rahman al-Islam, when something happens, there's such a union. But here the Rebbe said it was almost like this is a custom-made pasuk for this, especially when it's about a person who you may have never met, but the person was so profound and so exceptional, and you may not have known the person, but if you work on yourself, you can be inspired by this person's life. So let's as Chassidim try to think for a moment what this means. And at its outset, the Rebbe was sharing with Chassidim to try to emulate this person, and especially somebody who had that name. Later on, there was answers about the rest of the Rebbe's name, etc., etc. But let's look at now what happened historically, and due to the limitations of time constraints, we could touch on some of Rashi Prakim, just some bullet points of what we as Chassidim can try to um, do in our own lives, and this is also custom made to each and every one of us, because everybody is created unique, and every person has to say, like the Rebbe quoted this so many times, that a chayav adam leimar b'shvili nivra ha'olam. A person is obligated to say that the world was created for them. They are they are the purpose of creation. So if that's the case, if we are a purpose of creation, of the creation, then everybody is unique. And if that's the case, then what would the difference be? Why should we have to learn from any individual whatsoever? What's the bahachayitin aliba? Nevertheless, there are certain individuals who are, as we know from Chassidus, are a neshama klali. They are general souls. They pertain to everybody directly, not only indirectly, but directly related, and that therefore, because they relate to every single person, then they are on a level that you must learn from them. So, of course, this is true. So now the Rebbetzin was, and this is, it says this in Chassidus about anybody, about any couple, any couple. It really says that somebody is the neshomas, and this is we're not going to go into this because this is also way beyond our pay grade. But just in a basic thing, a couple is a unit. A unit, like we said earlier, Beis is the household, and the Kohen Gadol had to have it, and a person is complete. That's why we fulfill this mitzvah to the best of our ability. And when somebody doesn't, we it's for circumstances, for whatever they may be. But a person is for, there's a mitzvah to be married and to have a unit, a familial unit, a household unit, etc. Now, just as if we look into the stages of the Rebbe's life, and let's just take two stages, because those are the simplest stages for us to look at. There was the stage of the Rebbe's lifetime before the Rebbe was the Rebbe, which we call before the Nesias. And then there was the stage in the Rebbe's lifetime of the Nesias, when the Rebbe was Rebbe. And if we're just to try to take a glimpse, and now as the time goes on, we see more and more things, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin lived a very unique life, um, for for close to, I should say, for over 20 years before the Rebbe became Rebbe. And it was a life that was wrought with hardship and trials and tribulations. They lived in one place, and they had to run away, and they lived somewhere else. They lived first in Germany after their chasana, and then they went to France due to the rise of Hitler Machshmai, and they moved to France. And then the Rebbe was so much with uh, the Rebbe was involved, but the Rebbe's involvement was concealed for the most part, except for when it was revealed. Let's just say, like in the Tishrei, when the Rebbe would fabring, when the Reshimas came out after Gimel Tammuz, and people read, let's say, what the Rebbe spoke of Simchas Beis Sheva, and the Hayom Yom, where it has a little biography of the Rebbe. It says that he was a little nechba like Kaden, whatever. It says different things, that he was more quiet. In other words, before he was in such a revealed way. But there were enough glimpses for anybody who had a little bit of intuition, or more than that, that they're able to see who the Rebbe is. That all being said, the Rebbe lived a very unique life, and the Rebbe lived the Rebbe's tzidkes, as we know. This is also not our business, but the point is that he did it in such a unique format with the Rebbets in their little household, which was very, very private, and shared, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. And even the communal work that the Rebbe did, he did privately. He used to give, but there are a few exceptions to this. But other than that, primarily the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were very private people, elegant people, and they shared a circle of acquaintances. I'm not using the word friends on purpose, and who they interacted with. whether it was in Europe or United States, and along the way. But the Rebbe actually says it in as many words, and he even said by Fabrengen in certain times that he shunned uh, communal involvement, especially when the limelight was involved. The Rebbe's, if you look at the Fabrengen of after one of the Gerrer Rebbe was nostalgic, or the Rebbe speaks about that that he and the Rebbe, this is the Rebbe's words, and it's something along the lines of he reluctantly went on a shlichus from the Rebbe's Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, together and and he said because he really didn't want to do these kind of things. He also writes it to the Frierdiker Rebbe. If you look at the letters, the Rebbe says that I don't like these things of excitement. The Rebbe called it. The Rebbe was very withdrawn, and the Rebbe writes this about himself, and this is something that he shared with the Rebbetzin. Why are we talking about this in Chof Shevat? Because that was mostly till the Nesius. So what happened at the Nesius? The Rebbetzin actually not only gave that up, gave up that whole way of life and more for the Rebbe and for what the Rebbe had to do for the Rebbe's mission. And when the Rebbe says, "V'hacha yitna liboy," what does that mean to a chassid? Let's look at what the Rebbetzin did. Let's look let's try to take some of these things that she did in her lives. And of course, because everybody is individual and everybody is unique, we all don't have the same circumstances. We're not in the same time. We're not in the same place. We're not in the same milieu. But nevertheless, the idea of what we have to give for the Rebbe is alive and well and pertinent and important to each and every one of us, without exception. And that's what's asked of us. And that's what when the Rebbe says, "V'hacha yitna liboy," that why don't you take a look at this at what we call in English the sacrifice. Some don't like the word sacrifice because it means to trade something, to give away something, this reluctance to it. But there's some truth to that word too. In other words, when it's talk about a korban, that Chassidus explains to bring something closer. But what had to change? What what is it that we're not going to have, that we will do for what the Rebbe wants us to do? And here, this goes even more than that. And that is, we say in English, step out of your comfort zone or think out of the box, etc. And Rabbi Weinberg tells a story about how the Rebbetzin really and encouraged, let's just say, the Rebbe to do what he had to do. Now, as Chassidim, we say if the Rebbe told us many times that a Rebbe is born a Rebbe. So, of course, this is obvious. This is obvious. And the Rebbe was, on the one hand, if you look, I was talking to some Chassidim recently. Somebody wrote down, because it was Yud Shvat, so they said, 70 years. I said, what are you talking about 70 years? 71 years. No, they said, Yud Shvat, they said, you want to write 70 years? You could write 70 years from the first mimer that ever said, because that's a historical fact. But in terms of the Nesias, it's 71 years. And we showed that, even when it was Aboyim Shana that ever wrote, Tavshinun, 40 years. And it's in the Pasuk of the Maimer. This is without question. So someone asks me, and this isn't not only me, it's a group of Chassidim. We said, look, but the Rebbe didn't want. He was refusing. He was reluctant. Now, we say that Rebbe is starker, Rebbe active. I just recently, within the last few months, got some letters from the Rebbe that the Rebbe sent in within the first few months of the Nesias, actually to Eretz Yisrael, to the yeshivas, demanding certain things to be done. I said, wow, this is phenomenal from a person who people say wasn't doing, here it wasn't even hidden. The Rebbe is clear, straight out, giving directives how the yeshiva should be run and what should be done and what should not be done in a very sharp way. And So we see clear, even with the Rebbe, quote unquote, his reluctance. This was what we don't know why or how the Rebbe went through that process. It's not our business. It's not important. But what's important is that look what the Rebbetzin now made a total change in her life and her lifestyle for what the Rebbe wanted, needed, and what the Beseinu Nisayenu and what the creation, what the Abishter wants and needs. And now here's what the Rebbe asks each and every chassid. And when it comes Chavei Shvat, we could just go over this um, in our own lives. We are asked by the Rebbe to give up, to change, we all have the things that we're supposed to do. We all have our own unique, shall we say, we are all graced with an entity which the Rebbe called the Kluginke, the very wise one, the brilliant one, the genius. To some people, he would be like Albert Einstein. I mean, the mamish, the Yitzhahara, and the Rebbe called it as such, and the Rebbe said that this is coming from Yitzhahara. And we have a Chassidish Yitzhahara. We have all kinds of things. And the Rebbe asks us to not choose that, but to do what we have to do. And each and every person is unique. So for everybody, it means something else. But for all of us, no matter what, it means that we have to emulate that devotion that the Rebbetzin had. And that's where, again, those stories that all these people share could start to come in. Some of the stories are very nuanced in slight ways. We're not talking about now the Rebbetzins' brilliance and the Rebbetzins' dignity and the Rebbetzins' elegance and the Rebbetzins' wisdom and the Rebbetzins' all these things that we all hear about, and they're all important because they all give the whole picture. But look at her life, and then look at her devotion. And it's well known. Now you may say, well, this is just a regular standard, whatever it is. But if you look now, do the math, as they say. It's readily available to see the Yomanim, the diaries of when the Rebbe came and went throughout different periods of the Nesiyas and how much time he spent at home. And you'll see it's a very small amount of time. And sometimes in our own lives, this is a Maimer Hamuska that we have to look at too, to make sure we spend something called quality time. Dr. Weiss said it this year. He said it on the Farbrengen that Shluchim were having after the Kinnis of Shluchim, but he said it other times too, that the Rebbe told him that just like it's a mitzvah to put on film, he cherishes the time that he spends with the Rebbetzin. I think there he says that they would share a cup of tea at the time. But what we saw ourselves, how the Rebbe went home in the middle of the day, the Chof, the Lameds, and he would go home for a short period amount of time, usually less than an hour. He also talking about days that were like Yom Tif. Let's just take Purim and Hoshana Rabbah, which is traditionally a day of a whole hoo-ha with the mishpacha, etc., etc. And we saw how when the Rebbe left, the Rebbe came back, which was when he was going to have the Suda from Hoshana Rabbah, the Suda's Purim, which is a mitzvah, one of the mitzvahs of the day, was under an hour. The whole thing, because of the Rebbe's devotion. But this was, and here's the most famous thing is that the Rebbe always would spend time with the Rebbe when the Rebbe came home after everything. Now the Rebbe's schedule, if you look at the Rebbe's schedule, the time that the Rebbe came home, I think the earliest may be only maybe after a day of a fast day when the Rebbe sometimes would still come back, but sometimes he stayed home. Maybe that would be the earliest. But the latest time would be something like 9 a.m., literally, between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning, meaning that it was still part of the previous day. Okay, and the Rebbetzin was there then also. And that means that the people know she would be in a chair. Maybe she slept. It's not our business. But the point is that this was still working together in this rigorous type of schedule. Sometimes the Rebbetzin actually told people about this too, that it's going to be soon. She arranged appointments with people um, according to when it would be scheduled that the Rebbe would be there, because that was that important piece. But then the Rebbetzin also, I want to say that, and this takes it in a different step, but let's say that Rebbetzin also had her quote unquote shlichus or job that the Rebbe wanted her to do. And some of the things were, and I'm not getting into any particulars whatsoever, because that again, that's beyond our pay grade. But there's certain of these relationships that we learn about and hear about that the Rebbetzin had with people. The Rebbetzin, by the way, we're talking here with a community from England, and many people from England actually had a unique relationship with the Rebbetzin. They're from the 1% that share with the rest of us. But some of these people were literally introduced by the Rebbe. In other words, this relationship didn't happen by mistake or by something else, but some of them, the Rebbe actually made this relationship. And additionally, the very famous relationship that the Rebbetzin was impressed with a certain individual who came to thank the Rebbe for a bracha that he got. And she wanted to meet this person who was appreciative and showed appreciation, which is a whole basis of another part of our attitude, that we have to show appreciation. We always write, we go to the oil, we say, Hinim Levakirs, we asking brachas. We also have to thank for the brachas and report back when something worked. You know, we all have this experience in our lives. Sometimes we forget to report back. And my uncle mentioned that we were Baruch Hashem graced with a granddaughter. Today was she was named for my mother. It's the first name, and it's today's Chof Shevat. And somebody was to mention, well, just share something a little personal. And you know, so there's a shtickle dilemma here. The baby's father, very chiddush man. Some may know, whatever. So people think, you know, that's Chof Shevat, first child, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, and he actually named for my mother, was a well-known shluch of the Rebbe. Actually, I was mentioning to somebody that the Rebbe actually used that title for my mother. The Rebbe wrote Rebbetzin and letters to my mother. And I think it may be unique. I don't know how unique, but that being said, and there's even a story where there was a chassid who had a child born Yud Beis Tammuz, and he wanted to give the name Yosef Yitzchak. It was in the 60s in the Chofs, and his shviger, who also comes from a Chassidish household, you know, wanted that he should give the name for her father. And the Rebbe told this chassid, you know, tell your shviger that what would your father want to give for the Rebbe. And according to that, I'm thinking here, oh, then this may be even more telling. But if you think for a moment, let's say somebody were to ask the Rebbetzin what to do. What would the Rebbetzin want? We could maybe never know. You can never say, what would the Rebbe say? What would? But that's not a bad thing, because we have to learn to live our lives in a certain way, in the framework and guidelines that the Rebbe set out for us. So in that sense, what would the Rebbetzin say to do in such an instance? I don't know. But anyway, everything's about Ruach HaKodesh, so I have no problem sharing that the Ruach HaKodesh said to do what was done. That being said, the Rebbe Bachman personally, our oldest daughter was named Chof. I was talking then to Rabbi Klein, just because I ended up speaking with him. I asked him if there was about certain Haridoyas. He wouldn't tell me anything. He said nothing. He said, this is all your business. And I said, Chof. So I looked into the Sichos, and the Rebbe actually gives a moedindik bracha to anybody who gives the name for the Rebbe. It's in the Sichos of Chof Shevat of Shemim Tes. You look it up, and it's in other places too. The Rebbe mentions more than once about the when the Rebbe speaks of the greatness of the Rebbe, and he also speaks about the girls who carry her name, and therefore, and our oldest daughter is named Chaimushka because I looked at it that it's Vakor Velenu. This is what I heard from the Rebbe say, etc., etc. But even though it was Chopop, the Gam that Jota Shaykhs from Chopop too. But that being said, the Rebbe Blackmishkin Balchev, so the next daughter was born, and she was named Anchof Heyoder Chana. Okay, so jetzt habe ich my mama auf Chof Shevat, das ist eine andere Sache. This is all some thoughts. But in our life, getting back to the Chayit and the Libai, the Rebbetzin devoted her life to what the Rebbe wanted, whether it was taking care of and having relationships with people who weren't necessarily her speed, to put it nicely. But and that doesn't mean that they were not her speed, but she with simcha and really enjoyed doing the shlichus, and she did it in a great way. How do I say she enjoyed it? Because of that this is the way tzaddikim work. They enjoy to do what they're supposed to do. But what is her first choice? I wasn't there to see, but it's certainly a unique thing if you observe, and if you'll just think about a lot of the stories that you hear, put them into a pot and see what her life was about. And I mean from the people who worked there and the people, and I'm talking about just the legitimate stories, people first-hand things, and then you can get a glimpse. I mean, there's a famous story about a girl who was actually from Minnesota, and she actually was niscaded by my parents. Uh, I remember her very well. Today she's a shlucha. She tells the story. I believe it's on Gem. Um, and she was learning in Mochachana, and and they wanted to meet the Rebbe. They didn't know that it's how it works and what's going on here. And somehow or other, they got a letter to her, and the Rebbe said they sent her a note, and the Rebbe, Mrs. Galperin, who had a relationship with the Rebbe, was the cook in Mochachana. And she said that Rebbetzin who wrote, who did this, and she set up an appointment with them, and they actually went to meet the Rebbetzin, and the Rebbetzin asked them all kinds of things. But it's interesting. She asked them a lot about the Gash music. What kind of music do you like? What are your clothing? Where do you? And if you think about the story, she explained that they were like, they had come to Mochachana and they became like these ruchnistic people. They forgot that it's dira b'tachtonim is taich, that you have to live in this world and bring the shkina lamata and elevate everything. That means you have to be able to be in the world. And this was the message of the Rebbetzin that she felt that the Rebbetzin gave her. I'll share another story that I actually heard firsthand, and I want to. It'll also just to add to this collection of stories and give us our own job of hachayit in the libay, to inspire ourselves to do what's the tough part, to do what's asked of us, to give our devotion to the Rebbe and what the Rebbe asks of us. Each and every one of us, kol chad v'chad l'kum shiur delay. Each and every one of us, each one what is asked of us, and every person is a different thing. Every person has a mashpia. Every person has a guide to who and what. And if they don't, they have to. So I visited, and it was my father was on Gezund, a certain individual, and I'll tell you where I visited him. It was in a place where the Rebbe made a mitzvah that you have to visit people, especially Purim time. Chanukah, this wasn't either of those times, but he was behind bars. Now, unfortunately, he was behind bars because of the Dina, he did something which was a violent crime, unfortunately. But he was a Talmud at a certain point in time of a yeshiva. Used to be here, a yeshiva in Crown Heights called Chanoi Chlanar, and he was a Talmud in that yeshiva. And he told me this story straight up. He said he didn't know anything, but what happened was they used to send them some nights a week to give out pushkas in Crown Heights, to knock on the doors and give out pushkas. And he didn't realize the whole story when it happened. He didn't even know what happened till way after it happened. But what happened was the Mendel, the yeshiva, went looking around and said, "Who went yesterday on President Street to give out the pushkas. This guy tells us a story. He says, it was me. Is everything okay? He says, I just want to know who it is. Tell me what happened. He says, nothing happened, whatever. It was like a regular night. He says, what happened? So he says, you go into any of the houses? He says, yeah, one in the house. A lady invited me in and sat me down and asked me a lot of things about the yeshiva. And she offered me something to eat, this and then. This was the Rebbe's house. He had no clue. He had no clue who was the Rebbe. He had no clue of anything. And he just, they knocked on the door and said, I'm from the Yeshiva Chanoch Lanar. Do you want to have would you take a pushka? This is what they used to do. And she invited him in. And she sat him down. She asked him, tell me, what do you study? Who's your teacher? And she did a whole interview. She really, she got a whole report that way of the yeshiva firsthand, which I'm sure she shared with the Rebbe. And there are other stories like this too, but we heard this, and I heard the story more than 10 years ago, and and he didn't realize, like I said, till the next. She didn't say I'm this and this. She gave him a piece of cake. She gave him a drink. And she asked him about what he learns. She asked him details of what he learns. And now, if you know how the yeshiva works there, they learned in the morning was the Limudei Kodesh, and that was their specialty. For Limudei Choil, they used to take a bus and take them to Ocean Parkway. She asked him about that. She asked him, how does the bus, how does the schedule, how does it work? Who's your teaching English? What are you English you learn? She asked him every single prat and kept him whatever, 20 minutes, whatever it was. And through this whole thing, he had no clue. He was happy to sit down in somebody's house and have a piece of cake and whatever it was. And it was it's an interesting story. And he found out about it because I think Rabbi Chadakov called the next day the yeshiva about some detail of something. So of course she told the Rebbe told Rabbi Chadakov about whatever it was that they wanted to know about. So that's how it got even back to this guy who we were visiting for whatever reason, and he shared with us that story. So Al Koponim, it's Chof Shevat, and the Rebbe said that many, many times about Rabbi Seinu Nisiyenu, the day of the Hilula, everything comes then to a head, to a pinnacle, and whatever they did, Kol Meshachim Echayav, B'chaim Chayusam B'Almadein, everything that they did, and that's a lifetime, is a long time and a lot, but it's Poil Yeshua's Bekerev Ha'aretz, it's able to affect salvation in the innards of the earth, meaning we all have our Oretz, our artzius, and all the things that Oretz means, our earth, our earthiness, but we can have salvation in that. And we have to take a day like Chof Shvat, a day which is the reciprocal part of the Rebbe, the support of the Rebbe, the support that's gained from the Rebbe, and all the things that Chassidus says, and the things that we're moving towards. Mashiach will come of Eishes Chaim Ateres Baila, whatever that may mean in such an Indian. But think about it on your own level of learning Chassidus, and apply it to your own lives, our own lives, each and every one of us. Each and every one of us has a struggle. Each and every one of us has nisyonis. And that's what we say every day, etc. But think about the bigger picture. Look at what the bigger picture, and then it doesn't have to be a sacrifice. It goes from being a sacrifice to being a partnership and a participation and something which is done together. And then it's b'chol levav chavishna yitzarecha. It becomes everything is in unison and it's fused to work together. L'chaim, that in this Chof Shvat, indeed, each and every one of us, like the Rebbe says, B'chol Yavayich Yisrael, the Rebbe connected it with that pasuk that everyone is blessed, and the Poel Yeshuas, the Rebbe in an open way loved people that she didn't know or see or just like every Yid should do, like it says in Hayom Yom, to turn out for somebody you don't even know and you have no clue about. And this is not, we're not talking about all the things that are personified because for some it's well known. And if it's not well known, get to know it. It's worth it. And it's a day that's connected that the Rebbe shared with us. It's not a spitz thing. It's something which the Rebbe shared from the first minute, the first tefillah, after the, like we said earlier, the Rebbe said, it's v'hachayit neliba. I'm now sharing this great woman with everybody. And Meshach HaShiva, the Rebbe said that this woman is greater than people know, greater than people imagine. The Rebbe said it in English, and you could hear that. The Rebbe said that very few appreciate properly. So takes us years to unpack that and to be able to, and each and every one of us each and every one of us has and can have that relationship. It's something that when we go to the oil, most people are noyeg. If you're not noyeg, it's a davar achi poshet to be noyeg. The Rebbe himself was noyeg to go to the kvorim of the wife of the Rebbe, and the Rebbetzin, the mother of the Rebbe, and the Rebbetzin, the wife of the Rebbe is next to the Rebbetzins of the other Rebbe Seinu, and and they are certainly all Poel Yeshuas, and we could report to them, and the Eibusha shall help that indeed, like the Rebbe said, when they get to Chof Shevat, and by doing all the regular minhagim, that we should merit the true full redemption of the Okitzo Verano Sheikh Neyofor. The Rebbe said it, and with all the inyonim. And we should see the Rebbe, be with the Rebbe, begashmias, mamish, and therefore will be in a simchas olam al roisham, in a way then the Rebbe said at that time also that tzaddikim come in tefillah. That's what the Rebbe said at Meshach those days of the Shiva, and it was also in relationship to the Rebbetzin. Because when the Rebbe was crying, the Rebbe said that when it says Meishav Aaron Yimohem, I think that was, if I remember correctly, it was when Yid Reb Aaron Soloveitchik was there, and and uh, and the Rebbe was crying when he said this. We used to hear. I mentioned earlier that I was a bocher in Boston, so we used to get the hook. We ourselves. Let me just. We'll finish with this. We went for Nicham Avelim that night because Dan Hollis said you have to go back to yeshiva, and we actually went. We went after Maidav. We got to go into Maidav. And then after Maidav, and I was telling somebody recently, I'll never forget, it was Ki'ilu, Ki'ilu Nichem Avelim, as if, so to speak. We walked by, and the Rebbe was sitting, the Rebbe's eyes were so wide open, his mouth was open. The Rebbe was, I can't describe it, don't want to describe it, and it was a terrible thing. Awful. I mean, I don't want to, it's terrible to even speak like this, but it was. And then when a person started to even say to yourself this, I don't know what we finished saying, but the Rebbe looked at every person, every bocher. I mean, we knew, we have to do this, and whatever it'll bring, whatever it is, the Rebbe sees that we're walking, we're there. So we went back. We went back that night, and we actually stopped in New Haven, Connecticut. We knew it's interesting. There was a building that Rebbetzin visited. She actually helped pick the carpets for the building, like as is well known. Anyway, we stopped there, but we used to listen to the hookup in the morning and after mincha. We used to be able to hear. If you were there, you couldn't hear, but we used to hear this live. All the people that came to speak with the Rebbe afterwards, and the Rebbe was crying when he said this, the Meshav Aaron, and he said that's something that that's an awesome, scary thought that Rebbe said. But that's the way it is. It's going to happen in a moment, in a second. Moshe Rabbeinu will be here, visible, seen to everybody. And on, come right away. That's what it says. That's what it's going to be. And that's going to be with all the tzaddikim. Happens to be that we traded. We wanted to go back for Shabbos because it was during this time. I'll just tell you another story. As you know, he was nifter already, the manal of the yeshiva. Then he was nifter this year. So we told him. He said. Whatever you were, we were supposed to go once a month. We already went to once a month. I remember what it was, negotiation, but we told him, we made a deal with him, and we kept the deal. And we said that we're going to give up Purim. We'll trade Purim because for some reason the Seder was that we could go in for Purim. Maybe because till then there was Fabrik, whatever it was. We traded Purim for Shabbos Pashas Mishpatim. We B'Shas Maisa, of course, we could never imagine whatever the Hemshech will be. But of course, we're good businessmen in Bachar. So we said we'll trade Shabbos and Mishpatim for Purim. Then later, Purim will convince them we should go for Purim also. You're like this, you're not gonna go there. Chatei Pacher. And we went for Bash Mishpatim, and that was only Fabrengen. Then for 3 weeks, the Rebbe was home afterwards. But there was a very historical Fabrengen, and the Rebbe took again Nichem Avelim Motzei Shabbos in 770, but they're on Kodesh, and like I said, we stayed for Purim, but and then we used to go in. When we went subsequently through the rest of the year, and the next year we used to go on Thursday night. So that on Friday morning we were allowed in because we were shluchim. We used to daven. We used to daven in the Rebbe's house, Shachris and Mincha, whatever we had for a little protection. Let's just say. So it happens to be because we went for that Shabbos. I went in, so we already got into Mincha on Friday in the Rebbe's house, and actually the person who was there, he's still he wasn't yet the prime minister of, but Bibi Netanyahu was there, and he came. I happened to have stayed. I don't know if other Bochum didn't. Maybe they went out. You're supposed to go out, but whatever. I made sure to stay, and he was speaking to the Rebbe also, and about Eretz Yisrael and these kind of things. Anyway, everything is recorded, so the Eibusher should help that indeed each and every one of us should try to fulfill the edict that the Rebbe shared with us on the day of Chof Shevat 33 years ago. Lag Shona, Gal Shona, Gal Leini Vabitin Infloisment Teresecha, and indeed it should be V'Achayit and Aliboy in our Hiskashrus to the Rebbe, because she was the biggest Mekusher. The Rebbetzin was in this way totally devoted to the Rebbe, changed her whole way of life, gave up the way she lived before for that whole tkufa, and changed everything for the Rebbe and for the Rebbe's Nasias. And that's what each and every one of us should do. And the Rebbe should help that indeed then we'll be Zoiche to the Meishav An Nimoim, with the Rebbe and the Rebbe's and Bis Mashiach to Kenu immediately. Chaim.